Have you ever been in the situation where you have a fantastic idea, product or a service that you're convinced would be perfect for a particular potential customer, but every time you try to convince that person of your great idea, it just bounces off a thick skull? Wouldn't it be fantastic if you could take your idea, put it in a special container so that it went inside? It was accepted in the mind of your potential customer, accepted and understood. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Well, there is such a container, and it's called a story. I'm Mike Adams, and I've been in B2B sales and running B2B sales teams for more than 20 years. And I think I first noticed the power of stories in sales when I was working in Russia in the early 2000s. I was running a sales team there, and I was working for an oil and gas services company, a huge company called Schlumberger. And the story of Schlumberger's history in Russia was a particularly interesting story, and I used to tell it to customers and future customers. Schlumberger was founded in the late 1920s by two French brothers who invented a technique for finding oil in oil wells by measuring the resistivity of the rock. And it was a wildly successful idea, and the brothers moved into Russia in the early 1930s, and they were so successful that they were given the Order of the Soviet Union for their contribution to the Russian oil industry. But they suffered an incredible setback when the company was nationalized. All of their assets were taken by the Russian government under Stalin, and they're forced to leave the country. So fast forward to the 1990s, and Russia was opening up again to Western companies, and Schlumberger needed to make a decision. Would they re-enter the Russian oil and gas market? The CEO was presented with a business case, and he was asked, how much money are you prepared to risk on what is, a pretty risky venture? And his answer was $200 million US. And so Schlumberger set about investing in two of the largest newly nationalized Russian oil companies, newly privatized Russian oil companies, and were pretty much immediately successful. They put people and technology into those companies and were able to double the production within a very short period of time. And I used to tell that story, and I realized the power of that story when I started hearing it back from customers and potential customers. And I realized that the story was almost self-fulfilling. Customers wanted to be part of that success story. And in fact, Schlumberger was wildly successful in Russia. It's now a multi-billion-dollar business for Schlumberger. And I was very successful also in my sales management role, selling software to oil and gas companies. In late 2002, it was time for me to leave Russia, to my family to come back to live in Australia. And we decided to live in Melbourne, which is a town we hadn't lived in before, and not an oil and gas city. So I was forced to look for work outside my chosen industry. And I was very fortunate to pick up a role in the telecommunications industry, selling very high value telecommunications network equipment to one of the largest telecommunications carriers in Australia. And I used to joke to my friends after I got that joke that, I was particularly well suited, not knowing anything about telecommunications or that customer or the company I was working for. But nonetheless, I got that job. And I'm pretty sure I got the job because of the stories that I told about the success that I'd had in Russia and in Norway and in other sales situations, even though those stories were not related to the industry that I was going to be working in. We set up our sales consulting company in 2014, and I was chasing a particular company that I thought would be a good early customer for us. I met the managing director of that company in Melbourne, although he was Perth-based, And the idea was that we were going to meet when I was next in Perth, and every time I was going to Perth, he wasn't there. He was somewhere else in the world. And finally, I wrote an email and suggested, why didn't he meet my business partner who was based in Perth instead? And I got a one-line email back saying, all right, but we're not buying anything. Well, my business partner, Sue, doesn't consider herself a salesperson. She's an expert in procurement and tendering. So pretty nervous about doing this call on her own. And so we talked about it, and I suggested to her that she tell her story about why we founded and why she was so interested in founding. And the reason was grounded in her frustration with salespeople when she was helping prepare tenders for her customers, because salespeople were unable to explain to her the situation behind the tender and the competitive situation, and she felt that it was a failure in sales, and that frustration had led her to start our company. Well, she told that story to the managing director, and I sat waiting in Melbourne to hear what was the result, and I got a phone call a couple of hours later, excitedly on the phone, Sue telling me that she told the story, and the managing director had said, welcome to my world, let's go to the whiteboard. And that was one of our very first customers for our new sales consulting company. So what I've realized over the years of running sales teams and watching, observing excellent salespeople across many industries is that the very best salespeople tell stories. They use stories. They tell them often. They collect them. And that's really a tremendous secret to their success. And you can learn how to do it as well. It's not a terribly difficult thing to do. It's not technically difficult. You need to learn how to tell what type of story in what situation, what the structure of a story is, and you'll find yourself able to present your ideas in such a way that people accept them and understand them and run with them. And that's a wonderful thing. So please join us in our story selling workshops. I'm Mike Adams. Thanks for listening.